Reinier Derrida has always carried himself like a man who knows exactly where he stands in the chaos of MMA, and when he sat down with Mike Perry on the Overdogs podcast, there was no hesitation in his voice. The Dutchman, once pegged as a quiet technician, spoke with the confidence of a man who had seen the middleweight picture unravel and realized that the only way to bring clarity was to put himself right at the center of it. Originally booked to face Fluffy Hernandez in Vancouver, Derrida was forced to watch that opportunity collapse when Hernandez pulled out. Rather than sulking or retreating into silence, he accepted Brendan Allen, a fight that instantly changed the stakes of his year. He didn't talk about squeaking out decisions or playing safe. He wanted to do what no one else had been able to do lately. Not just beat Allen, but finish him, put a full stop where others had only scribbled commas. And as he laid out the landscape of the division, his eyes inevitably turned toward the looming storm cloud that was Khamzat Chimaev. Derrida didn't sugarcoat it. Chimaev is lethal if he gets your back, almost impossible to shake off once he wraps his arms around you. And yet the Dutch contender believed there was a path, a very narrow one, but a path nonetheless. You can't wait for Khamzat to shoot, he said. You have to threaten him, make him react, mix in takedown threats of your own, because when the wolf feels pressure, that's when openings appear. But for now, he repeated, his mind was on Allen, the man who had given both Fluffy and Imavov fits. Allen had nearly finished Fluffy late, hurt him bad, and yet couldn't put him away. Derrida wanted to show that he could. In his words, there was a quiet jab at Paulo Costa, who had been offered the Vancouver slot but declined because he didn't want 5 rounds. To Derrida, that was cowardice disguised as negotiation. Costa had ducked a golden opportunity, and Derrida was more than happy to call it out. His voice sharpened as he recalled how badly he wanted to stay on the Vancouver card, not just for a paycheck, but because he suspected that if he won in January, before Ramadan, Khamzat might be forced into his orbit. For Derrida, Allen wasn't just another opponent. Allen was a doorway to destiny. And across the ocean, another man was framing his destiny in equally bold colors. Jack Della Maddalena, the Australian surgeon with fists like scalpels, spoke to Submission Radio and made it clear that his future ran straight through Islam Makhachev. No hedging, no vague talk of possibilities. Jack wanted the knockout, the kind of finish that would rip the roof off Madison Square Garden. His tone was calm, almost analytical, but beneath it burned a certainty that felt almost reckless. He pointed back to Alexander Volkanovski, the smaller man who had made Islam look human, who had forced the champion into deep waters. Jack knew he wasn't Volk, and Islam reminded him of that. But Jack also knew that styles make fights, and Islam's tendency to shoot under pressure could be his undoing against a striker with sniper timing. Jack spoke about preparation as if it were a ritual, 5 hard rounds in camp, a solid game plan, the kind of repetition that turns instinct into reaction. He wanted to finish Islam, not just outpoint him, because a finish would erase doubt and paint him as more than a dangerous prospect. It would crown him as the face of 2 divisions. And the stakes were absurd. If Islam lost, he'd likely return to lightweight, opening the door for the super fight Ilia Topuria had been screaming for. If Islam won, welterweight itself would tilt on its axis, with a new king planted firmly at the top. Jack knew what was at risk, and yet he leaned into it, almost relished the danger. The talk turned to future matchups, Shavkat Rakhmonov, Sean Brady, even Kamaru Usman, but Jack brushed them aside. None of them mattered until he carved through Islam. He spoke about differences, about Islam's finishing ability compared to Belal Muhammad's grinding persistence, about challenges unique to the Dagestani champion. He wasn't dismissive, he was meticulous, and still, the undercurrent of his words was violence. He wanted to knock Islam out, to silence the myth of untouchable wrestling, and he said it with the conviction of a man who had rehearsed that moment in his head 1,000 times. While Jack sharpened his tools for the garden, Ilia Topuria was busy proving that his ambition knew no weight class. The Spanish-Georgian phenom, already featherweight champion and obsessed with the name Islam Makhachev, was caught on camera sparring with welterweights. Pictures of him trading with Ian Gary went viral, and when Spanish journalist Alvaro Camonro asked him about it, Ilia didn't hesitate. He confirmed the sparring, confirmed that it was technical but real, and most importantly confirmed that at no point did he feel out of his depth. Very comfortable. He repeated, very, very comfortable. It was a subtle message to fans, but a direct challenge to Islam. I belong at 170, and I can handle the size. He wasn't shy about it either. He revealed he had sparred with many welterweights, and never once felt overwhelmed. The whispers around the gyms grew louder. Kamaru Usman had spoken about Ilia's surprising power. Gilbert Burns had admitted the kid could land clean shots, and Ilia himself carried those testimonials like fuel. He wasn't just chasing greatness. He was invading divisions, inching closer to the dream of becoming the first three-division champion. And with every sparring story that leaked, the mystique of Ilia grew. Fans debated whether it was arrogance or prophecy, whether a man his size could truly stand against welterweight elites. But Ilia never blinked. He talked about Armand Tsarukyan or even Paddy Pimblett as possible fights, but his eyes never left Islam. The lightweight king was the crown jewel, the fight that would etch his name into history, and he was using every spar, every rumor, every viral photo to remind the world that he wasn't giving up on that vision. And then, as if to remind everyone that the sport's gravity still ran through him, Khamzat Chimaev's name surged back into headlines. Footage had leaked, grainy but undeniable, of Alexander Gustafsson taking him down in training. To casual fans, it was shocking. To purists, it was a reminder of context. Gustafsson was the man who had taken John Jones to the brink, who had planted the champion on the canvas in a way few ever did. Chimaev, still a middleweight by frame, was giving size away in that room. When asked about it, Chimaev didn't bristle or deny. Instead, he showered Gustafsson with respect. He called him a role model, a brother, a complete fighter whose wrestling was flawless, whose scrambles were art, whose control was like iron. He admitted that watching Gustafsson had inspired him to become better, to dream bigger, to fight harder. And for once, the Wolf sounded almost sentimental. But sentiment doesn't erase doubt. Analysts like Michael Bisping and Dean Thomas seized on the footage to debate Khamzat's future. Dean warned that logistical issues, visas, and long absences might cripple his reign before it began. Bisping, with that blunt honesty that made him both loved and hated, declared that the division was staring down a disaster. Not because Khamzat was weak, but because he was too strong. Nobody could beat him, he said, except maybe Reinier Derrida with his jiu-jitsu. Strickland barked from the sidelines that he was the man to do it, but the tide of opinion leaned toward inevitability. Chimaev's dominance would be long, violent, and suffocating. And yet, the footage of Gustafsson lingered, a small crack in the armor, a reminder that even wolves can be taken down. What made this entire tapestry electric was how interconnected it all was. Derrida believed a win over Allen could bring him to Khamzat. Jack Della Maddalena knew his fate against Islam could rewrite two divisions. Ilia Topuria was already sparring welterweights and calling for Islam, proving that no ceiling could contain his ambition. And Khamzat himself, humbled yet proud, acknowledged that he had grown by measuring himself against the legends before him. Every story bled into the next. Every fighter's path tangled with another's, creating a web of possibilities that left fans dizzy with speculation. Could Derrida really submit the Wolf? Could Jack flatten Islam? Could Ilia storm welterweight and shatter history? Could Gustafsson's shadow haunt Khamzat long enough to open the door for someone else? These weren't isolated tales. They were pieces of one massive storm brewing across three divisions, each wave threatening to crash into the next. And the fans felt it. On forums, on podcasts, on Twitter Spaces, the debates raged. Some called Ilia delusional. Others hailed him as the heir apparent to Conor McGregor's legacy of audacity. Some warned Jack Della was biting off more than he could chew. Others called him the dark horse who would finally topple Dagestan's grip. Some dismissed Derrida as a big fish small pond champion from ONE trying to prove himself in the UFC. Others pointed out that his skill set was tailor-made to neutralize Khamzat's mauling style. And through it all, Chimaev loomed, snarling in interviews, thanking Gustafsson, promising violence, reminding the world that the wolf doesn't just hunt, he devours. As November approached, Madison Square Garden buzzed with Jack's promise of a knockout, Vancouver whispered about De Ridder's quest for Allen, Spain hummed with Ilia's sparring tales, and Sweden chuckled at footage of Gustafsson's takedown. The sport felt alive, unpredictable, charged with the kind of tension that only MMA can produce. No script writer could invent characters this raw, this flawed, this hungry. They were all chasing each other, all daring to believe they could rewrite history. And every fan watching knew that when the cage door closed, nothing was guaranteed. And that uncertainty, that madness, that swirling